Chosen Season 4, Episode 5. We are over halfway through the entire series at this point, and now we're getting into the meat of this season, really discovering what it's about and moving forward into all of the hard bits here. Now, this episode in particular, we're going to be breaking down all of the Pharisee, well, more of the Sanhedrin side of things. It's not just Pharisees. We're talking about Pharisees, Sadducees, Herodians. We're talking about scribes and lawyers. We're talking about all of it. So there's a ton of stuff to come in this episode in particular, and there's a lot of really interesting bits that they just kind of snuck in here from the side of, the writers and everybody else that's making this show. There's a lot of really, really cool little aspects here. So we're going to jump in first at this scene right here. This is a debate between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now, these are two different groups. We'll let it play for a little bit, and then we'll talk about why these groups are so different, what is going on with them, and we'll kind of get into it there. So let's start here.
Adonai makes no mention of an afterlife.
It's right there in the Songs of David.
David is not Torah.
According to the doe of the dawn.
My God, why have you forsaken me?
Yes, but further down, near the end, all the prosperous of the earth eat and worship before him shall bow, all who go down to the dust.
So tired of this line of reasoning.
And then here, in the prophet Daniel, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake.
All right, so this section here, if you didn't catch it while you were watching it, basically this whole section here is talking about the differences between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And so it's really important that we understand this because it's going to give us perspective as to why the Sadducees in particular really disliked Jesus and wanted him to go away. Okay, this is kind of setting up all of that stuff for later on for season 5, season 6, and so on, right? So here we have a new character that we've talked about a couple of times previously in the previous episodes. This is Gadara. He is kind of our archetype for all of the Sadducees, okay? So really the only two Sadducees that we really know in this whole sect here are Gadara and then Caiaphas. These two are Sadducees, and so that means they have a very specific line of belief. Here, we're seeing parts of that line of belief, and the big things are two major things that are different from the Pharisees. One is that they do not believe in the afterlife. They don't believe in heaven or hell. They don't believe in these different things that the normal kind of common Jew would. Here, he's arguing basically that these other scriptures that they're bringing up they're not to be trusted, and we'll get into that in a second, because the second reason is that first, they don't believe in the afterlife. Secondarily, they only listen to the first 5 books of scripture, basically. This is called the Pentateuch, okay? So they believe the Torah is only the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of our Old Testament, okay, and their scriptures altogether. So the Pharisees have the entirety of the Old Testament. Okay, the Sadducees only really listen to the first 5 books, the Law of Moses, and then they disregard pretty much everything else. Okay, and so they only listen to those things. So here they're talking about, for example, the prophet Daniel or David's writings, things like that. But the Sadducee is disregarding those things because he doesn't think that they are actually scripture. He doesn't think that they're actually important. So why is this such a big deal? Well, this becomes such a big deal because if the Sadducees do not believe in an afterlife, they don't believe in the resurrection, a physical resurrection, right? If Jesus is going around and specifically resurrecting different people, for example, Lazarus, right, then the Sadducees are going to have a very, very big problem with that because it completely destroys their line of thinking. It completely destroys what they thought to be true. And so they're going to want to get rid of that as fast as they possibly can. Now, another thing that separates Sadducees normally is their wealth. Normally, Sadducees are of an elite class of Jews, and so they would come from upper nobility, and they would be kind of in a position of power. That's how they could afford, for example, to be part of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is not a paid position, which we'll talk about a bit more in a second as well, but they would be able to have wealth accumulated, and then they would be able to sit on the Sanhedrin as their job, even though they weren't paid to be there, if that makes sense. So let's continue on because we've got a bunch to go through, but that's a basic difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The afterlife is a big debate here, and then also what is scripture and what is not. Those are the two huge differences that we're kind of talking about in this debate here.
Some to eternal life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt.
I don't know how anyone can refute that. Metaphorical language. It's about Israel's national resurrection from being muddled amid the dust of the Gentiles.
So that's his argument there, is that all this talk about an afterlife, about people being resurrected, this is all metaphorical language. It's not real. It's just poetic. It's just it's used as an example, a metaphor for the Israelites as a whole, basically.
Awakening refers to the coming of Messiah, when Jews who love God's law will arise from their spiritual slumber, while those who reject the Messiah will be put to shame and contempt.
Rabbi Gedera, how do you interpret the words eternal life? Haye Olam.
God's immutable law is eternal. A life committed.
So they don't see eternal life as a forever afterlife. They see it as God's immutable law that is everlasting. And so our lives will end and God's law will continue, basically. Now, we won't dive too deep into this because we could be stuck here forever, but let's get over to the point where Yussif actually comes into play right here.
And social status make your interpretation all too convenient.
Your class is so comfortable in this life. Why should you worry about the next one?
So real quick here, they're talking about the hope that the Messiah and that the resurrection brings. The Jews during this period are oppressed by the Roman Empire, right? So because of that, they are in a state of hopelessness, right? And so they are looking forward to God saving them. They are looking forward to the Messiah coming and in their minds defeating the Romans. They are looking forward to God changing this whole thing that they are in, and when they die, they're hoping to go to the afterlife, and that is a hope, right, that they have. And so without those hopes, basically everything is just bleak, right? Everything is focused on this life, not the afterlife, as where, if you're a Christian, my whole being is focused on the afterlife, not this life, right? I'm not a citizen of this world, but I am an alien here, right? And I'm a citizen of heaven. And so if my focus is on being a citizen of heaven, then I don't really put as much weight on this life as I would my afterlife, right? Whereas the Sadducees, it would be flipped. Because they don't believe in an afterlife, there is no hope to move forward into. So because of their wealth and their comfortability here on earth, they don't worry about all the other things that maybe someone who doesn't have a comfortable life would need to worry about. And that's what they're kind of talking about here.
Ordinary Jews live lives of such discomfort that the hope of a better life in the resurrection is what they have to cling to.
And you, Rabbi Zebediah, you decline the daily Sanhedrin feasts?
Gedera, you are to address his interpretation, not his status.
Hypocrites! Both of you accused my supposed affluence of distorting my interpretation.
We are both provided for. The point remains, as much as you'd like to ignore it.
Yanni, please, take over.
Rabbi Gedera.
So here Shmuel sees Yussif and they begin to have a conversation, which we're about to get into here. But this whole situation here with these two different groups arguing, still being friendly and being able to talk through these different situations, this was extremely common during the time of Jesus and even today. If I have a Jewish guide that we take that is in Israel that takes us around and shows us these different places with the groups that we take. And so for her, she always says, if you have 10 Jewish people, you have 11 opinions, right? Because there are so many different things that they argue about or talk about or kind of walk through, right? But at the end of the day, they know that they're still family. They still know that they love each other. So that's the same thing that's happening here. These arguments and debates, these scholarly topics would happen all the time in Jewish society.
Yussif, what are you doing here? This one, come tell me.
I saw your name on the attendance for Sanhedrin, and I thought it was a mistake.
So did I, honestly.
You finally did it. Leaned into your Abba's wealth and connections. I never thought I'd see the day.
So we're seeing here what actually happened to get Yussif in the Great Sanhedrin. Remember, this is the Great Sanhedrin, the big group of 72 judges that are kind of the leaders of the Jewish people in the religious sense, right? So Yussif was able to essentially use his father's wealth and affluence in order to make his way into the Great Sanhedrin. He did not want to do this. He could have done this earlier on in his life, but he chose not to because he really wanted to just serve God to the best of his ability. He felt like he was pushed basically to go into this position because of everything that was happening with Jesus, and he wanted to be able to defend him, right? This is basically the last straw that shows us exactly who Yussif is. For the last several years, we've been saying that Yussif is most likely Joseph of Arimathea, but we really didn't have any proof of that quite yet. Now, we learned earlier on last season, in season 3, that his family is very affluent, they work in construction, and that kind of gave us a tip for sure, and they were in Jerusalem, so that gave us another tip. But now that Joseph, is in the Great Sanhedrin, this makes it 100% clear to me. As we see in the 3rd verse about Nicodemus only has 3 times that he shows up in Scripture. During the 3rd time that Nicodemus shows up in Scripture, we see that he buries Jesus along with Joseph of Arimathea, okay? And so Joseph of Arimathea, it says that he is part of the Great Sanhedrin, he's part of the judges, but he's also a secret follower of Jesus, right? And so that's how everything lines up with Yussif here, and he definitely is Joseph of Arimathea. 100% in my mind, but 99.999% just for the internet in case I'm wrong, right?
Well, it's here.
Well, you could have used your inheritance years ago.
To do what? I knew nothing but scholarship. I had to minister to our people first.
Setting aside my own jealousy, I imagine your Abba was upset.
Yes, but his recent contribution indicates he's gotten over it. That was something in there.
Do you think the Sadducees have a valid point?
The only thing I agreed with him on was that you ought not to have brought his fortunes into the argument. Let the interpretation stand on its own merits.
Sensitive about money, are we, Yussif?
We both used whatever means necessary to lay hold of our seats.
Yep.
You used bureaucratic triangulation. I used my Abba.
Yep, so now both of them are in this position. They are both in the Great Sanhedrin, which is really interesting because in season 2, Shmuel was kind of a mentee to Yanni, and now Yanni is the only one out of the 3 of these guys that's not in the Great Sanhedrin, even though he was supposed to be like way above them in season 2. So it's really, really funny to see that.
Does my way sound worse?
What matters now is that we are both here. The only question that remains is what we will do with our new positions.
Fair point. Although, I thought I did know what I came here to do. But lately, I'm not so sure.
This is a big turning point for Shmuel in particular. He says, I thought I didn't know what I came here to do, but lately I'm not so sure. We can see ever since episode 2 of this season, Shmuel is very uncomfortable with what is going on in the Great Sanhedrin. The fact that they're going after Jesus, which we're going to see more of later in this episode, the fact that they are killing people like John the Baptist, that's crazy that Herod even did that, and he doesn't know what to say anymore. He kind of started this whole thing. He got the whole ball rolling from being in Galilee and now going over here to Jerusalem and being a big part of this, right? Jesus is the reason that he's in the Great Sanhedrin in the first place, and yet he's starting to kind of move a little bit after having that conversation with Jesus during the season 3 finale. He prayed with Jesus, even though it wasn't on screen, and he starts to have this difference of opinion about Jesus, and it's definitely moving him in a direction, absolutely.
What has changed?
Let me show you around.
So Yussif is asking what has changed, and he says, let me show you around. Now, we're definitely seeing that not only Shmuel, but Yussif, they're gauging each other, right? They're seeing, oh, can I trust you or not? Is this something that, I can really put into your hands and just, allow you to be my friend again, almost? Remember back in episode 1 of season 1, and even all the way through season 1, basically, we see that these two are thick as thieves. They are the ones that are closest to each other. And so because of that, they haven't seen each other for a while, right? Ever since season 2, essentially, they've been separated from each other. So Yussif kind of, rose up the ranks in Capernaum, and then Shmuel kind of left and went into Jerusalem and did some different things, and then eventually became part of the Great Sanhedrin. So they haven't seen each other for at least 2 years or so. The timeline of The Chosen is always super weird, so I can't fully give you an answer on that. But about 2 years or so, they really haven't seen each other and haven't worked with each other for sure, for probably over 2 years, probably closer to 3 years. And so now they're finally back together, and they don't know what side each other is on, right? Is Yussif going to agree with Shmuel? Is Shmuel softened enough to agree with Yussif? They're not 100% sure, so they're kind of figuring that all out. Let's go to this section right here.
In the months since I last saw you in Capernaum, how have you grown in wisdom and stature?
See, that's so weird. This is what I'm talking about with the chosen timeline. He says, in the months since I last have seen you in Capernaum, he's talking about season 2, right? No, did he stop by in season 3 with Yanni? I can't fully remember, but there's no way that was just months ago. There's no way. I'll have to go back and look, but there's no way that was just months ago in Capernaum. It does not make sense with the timeline for sure.
Other than coming to your senses that you can leverage your family's wealth.
Will you stop with that?
Fine, but you're not the same impressionable Yussif that I knew in Galilee, always struggling with your talit.
I have become more committed, discerning, and observant, Shmuel.
Who are the men we walked past at the entrance? I thought you said you were observant.
That I meant in worship.
Okay, so you're observant. Now let's find out if you make observations.
I know what scribes are.
We also call them lawyers.
So here, Shmuel is basically introducing Yussif to the Great Sanhedrin, the environment around Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a much different place than Capernaum is, right? The Galilee area is known for fishing. It's not known for intellectuals and scholars, okay? Jerusalem is definitely known for intellectuals and scholars, people that are the sharpest of the law and the closest to God, right? It's called the Holy City, right? This is the place where those type of people are. So you have the scribes and the lawyers who basically are the experts on the law. These are the people that can give you any reference you need to know. They are the ones that are scribing the actual law, so making copies of it, making different scrolls, and making sure that it's perfect letter by letter. And if they ever got a letter wrong, they would never be allowed to do their job again, okay? That's how seriously this kind of stuff was taken. So this is the first of 3 groups that we're going to be introduced to by Shmuel here that kind of give us a lay of the land of Jerusalem as a whole, not just the Sanhedrin here, because most of the people he's talking about in this section here are actually not part of the Sanhedrin at all. They're just part of the landscape of Jerusalem.
In the sense that they are chief authorities on the sacred law of Moses, interpreters and arbiters of God's covenant with Israel.
They're not dressed as nicely as most lawyers I know.
It's an unpaid position.
It's interesting that he says that because, like I said earlier, all of these positions are unpaid. The Sanhedrin they don't pay their seated members. So they would have to have some other sort of job outside of this or immense wealth before getting this position ahead of time. So it is weird that Shmuel kind of says that they're a volunteer position because so is his.
They have a second job to support what they do here free of charge.
Why work for no compensation?
In hopes of finding favor with someone influential in here and securing a seat if one opens up.
Again, if they are struggling to work, they have a second job as they're a scribe, and then they have a second job, and then they want to get a seat on the Sanhedrin, then they would still need that second job in order to keep living, I guess. So it's a weird line there.
Whatever means necessary.
Exactly. What about them?
So this is the second group here. You can tell that they're wearing slightly different clothing here. Again, this group is most likely not part of the Great Sanhedrin, at least in history. Maybe in the Chosen it's a bit different. It's possible. It is possible, but very unlikely that this group would be part of the Great Sanhedrin.
Amethyst and topaz rings, popular in Greece. Athenian blue headdresses. Hellenized Jews visiting from Decapolis?
Yep, so they're visiting from the Decapolis here, so they're not part of the Great Sanhedrin even here, and so we're seeing that these are Hellenized Jews, okay? And so basically, these are known as Herodians, and I wonder if they get into that here, I don't remember.
Hellenized, yes, but not visitors. Herodians.
Yes, so Herodians. So Herodians are basically people that follow Herod Antipas, okay? So Herod the Great, Herod Antipas, these are sympathizers of Rome, essentially. So these are Jews who are following Jewish law and doing all the Jewish things, but they are basically okay with Roman occupation. They're okay with what Rome is doing, and they're trying to keep the peace overall. Maybe they don't love Rome, maybe they don't love the occupation, but they want to keep the peace, and they're okay with Rome staying in charge. They're okay with Herod staying in his place and keeping that kind of authority that's in place there, instead of what most of the other Jews want, which is total eradication of Rome, total eradication of the occupation. It's a way different way of thinking, and I'm sure that people like Shmuel and Yussif would have a really, really hard time with Herodians specifically.
Of course.
Supporters of the client king Herod Antipas, and by extension, Rome. They hope to secure greater political influence for themselves at the expense of the rest of Israel. Very morally compromised, selfish.
Yeah, so you can see his biased take here, right? Shmuel is like, these guys are horrible, they're selfish, whereas they would say, hey, we're trying to keep the peace, we're just trying to be the good guys here, right? So it depends on your perspective, where you're looking at it from.
Misguided. The zealots hate them.
Oh, they hate us too.
True. Everyone who isn't a zealot. Even them.
Elliot, seeing those less and less.
Following to the letter, you shall not round off the hair of your temple or mar the edges of your beard.
So these are followers of Shammai, and we're going to get into Hillel and Shammai in just a second here, so I'll hold off.
Devotees of the house of Shammai.
They're probably complaining about the Hillel acolytes right now. They both are committed to Torah equally, only Shammai is more literal, while Hillel focuses on the broader principle.
So we've talked about this quite a bit. I haven't talked about it as much on this channel, but there's a big... there's two big sects basically in this time period for the Jews, okay? A couple generations before this, basically you have the start of the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel. So the house of Shammai is this house that is very strict, okay? Shammai, he is to the letter of the law. Okay, for example, the example that's very common that's used anytime I've talked about this, and obviously the Chosen used it here as well. If an ugly bride basically is getting married, do you tell her that she's ugly or do you tell her that she's beautiful, right? Shammai would say, well, you can't lie to a bride on her wedding day, right? And then, of course, Hillel would say that every single bride is beautiful on her wedding day, okay? So he would say that's not lying, it's me saying that a bride is beautiful no matter what, right? And so Shammai is very to the letter, and Hillel is very kind of more lenient with the law in some circumstances like this, primarily with the oral law, not necessarily the written law. And so actually a lot of people believe that Jesus would have been of the house of Hillel because a lot of his teachings line up with that same sort of house and same sort of leniency in certain parts of it, right? In the way that they describe different things. And so this is a big part of how the Jewish system was during the time of Jesus, and then right after Jesus, around 70 AD, is when the house of Shammai started to fall, and it wasn't as popular as the house of Hillel, which became the prominent kind of understanding in Judaism. But before we get to that, I want to invite you to go to Israel with us. I know that these videos are great and you're learning a lot through this series, but there is nothing like being there in person and seeing exactly what happens in Israel. What there is to learn, and the people to meet, the food to eat, everything. This next trip that I've planned is the cheapest that I can possibly get these trips. Normally they're $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000, but my trip here is less than $4,000. We'd love for you to be a part of it, and if you can at all sign up, there's a link down in the description down below, or you can take your phone's camera and point it at this QR code and it'll take you directly to the site. From there, you can check out our brochure and see exactly what we're doing, and you can even save your spot with a $500 deposit. As you're seeing here, we had some of the most amazing moments in our last trip to Israel, and we'd love for you to be part of the next one. So don't wait, sign up today, spots are limited as always, and let's get back to the video.
The latest dispute. Whether you should tell a bride on her wedding day that she is beautiful, even if it is not true.
I'm guessing Shammai says no, because it would be a lie.
Correct, and Hillel maintains that a bride is always beautiful on her wedding day.
So that's the example that's pretty much always used when I've heard this talked about in the past.
A bigger story of God and his people.
Well, be careful who you say that around. I have a feeling about you, Yussif. You weren't lying when you said you are observant, discerning.
So we see here as Shmuel and Yussif are beginning to get closer, we see Gadara take the stand as well. And this is where we're going to get into the big plan that Gadara has here for what is supposed to be happening with this whole Jesus situation.
But we have gained new insight, which calls for revisiting. We all still mourn when we recall how the governor Pontius Pilate did so barbarously appropriate funds from the temple treasury for the construction of the Beer aqueduct to bring water into Jerusalem.
So he's talking here about a historical event that happened. Pilate was ruthless. We know this from history. There are certain times where Pilate went overboard and killed people that he wasn't supposed to. In this specific situation, he's talking about an aqueduct incident where a bunch of people were killed basically during this portion here, during this aqueduct situation. So that's what Gadara is talking about.
And worse yet, we all still grieve for the lives lost of those who rose in protest to resist this provocation and were crushed, dismembered, disemboweled.
So he's provoking them on purpose. He's bringing up these really hard moments for the Jews in order to get them angry and excited so that he can basically put forward his case here.
And impaled on poles, made an example of for all, that none should defy Pilate's designs for this city, nor the means by which he deigns to carry them out.
Gadara, you do us harm by reviving this abominable anecdote. We are still trying to heal.
It would be irresponsible to ignore the ways in which this cataclysmic bloodbath may now prove instructive.
So he's saying, okay, all of this horrible stuff happened. I'm sorry for bringing it up. However, we can use this. So what is he wanting to use it for here?
Instructive?
Credible intelligence has reached our ears that the event was a source of pain not only to us, but to Pilate himself.
So not only was this a really hard thing for us, but it was also a hard thing for Pilate, which is not something that they're expecting to hear here, right? They're expecting to hear that, like, oh, woe is us, this is a horrible thing that happened to us, and we hate Pilate, right? However, Gadara is going to flip this. Of course, politically, they would try to do these type of things all the time.
The willing child is proven incapable of remorse.
Not when his job is threatened. Emperor Tiberius was appalled both by Pilate's stealing from the funds, inexcusable even by Roman standards, and abundantly more so by the brutality with which he struck down our response.
So the emperor did not like what Pilate did. This is a really, really hard thing for Rome to kind of deal with overall. And so Pilate basically could have gotten fired or demoted or worse, right, earlier then. But Tiberius is giving him another chance here, which means Pilate is on a very, very short string.
What are you saying?
It would appear, however improbable, that we now want the same thing as Pilate.
Now, of course, all of the Sanhedrin would hate this, right? Gadara insinuating that Pilate and them could be working together. This would be really, really hard for them to swallow.
Peace. Pilate wants peace, or at least Caesar does.
Emperor Tiberius.
So here we're seeing Gadara talking about this whole peace thing, right? I think this is partially why the writers wrote in the Herodians earlier, because I think Gadara kind of leans a little bit in that camp. He wants to help the Romans, in this case, to keep the peace, which is exactly what Caiaphas talks about as well. This is a huge thing that Caiaphas is trying to keep the peace between Herod and the Romans and the Jewish people. He's trying to protect everybody in his own way, even though he fully does not understand what's kind of going on here with Jesus.
Tiberius Caesar Augustus is not fond of Pontius Pilate.
Exactly. Pilate's position as the procurator of Judea is on the line. He was reprimanded and warned when he sent out troops to kill Galileans while they were offering sacrifices in our temples, and then given a second warning for the aqueduct massacre.
So basically, he's got 2 strikes and he's up for his 3rd. We better take advantage of the situation.
He was already too young and in over his head for this position. And now, he is officially on notice.
Then let's make something happen so we can get rid of him.
So this is the two lines of thinking that immediately come up when they hear Pilate is vulnerable. The first line of thinking goes to, okay, let's get rid of him. Let's do something so that he gets in trouble again and we get rid of him, right? But Gadara is kind of going in a different direction. He's saying, let's use the evil that we have in order to get rid of some other things that we want gotten rid of, right? And so that's where he's going with this.
Short-sighted, Zebediah, as usual. I submit. We take advantage of his tenuous situation. Take care of some things we've been putting off.
Such as?
That's for this governing body and its committees to decide. We could suggest to Pilate, a revolutionary leader is fomenting an overthrow for, say, removing the Roman votive shields from the palace.
So he's kind of giving some options here of what's happening. Maybe there's a revolutionary leader that's trying to do this thing to get rid of their votive shields, which is like a Roman thing that we don't have to get into for this episode.
He does not take kindly to bribery.
What are his other options?
Yussif, hold your tongue.
I have a seat. I will use my voice. This is absurd.
Listen, I know what you mean.
I know you have things you want to achieve.
So here, basically, Gadara he's just started the ball in motion. So later on, we're going to get to it in this video. Later on, we're going to talk about the committees that Gadara was just mentioning. So he's saying, well, I don't know what we can do with this information, but we need to leverage Pilate's vulnerability in order for us to get to the place that we want to be, in order for us to get the things that we want out of this Roman relationship, right? And so he's saying, well, here's an example. Maybe we could give up a revolutionary or find someone, make them the villain and then give Pilate a win so that we get somewhere in this relationship and we use Pilate's vulnerability to our advantage. And so obviously that's going to turn into the committees kind of deciding how they can use this vulnerability overall, which we'll get to in a later scene here. Now, here we see another scene in between Shmuel and Yussif where they begin to talk to themselves about what just happened in the Great Sanhedrin, but also you can tell that both of them are kind of discussing what to do here. Yussif needs to find a place where he can be most effective in defending Jesus, because that's the whole purpose that he's here. And Shmuel obviously is just trying to get Yussif in a position where he's not going to harm himself, as it's his first day in service to the Great Sanhedrin, right?
Chief, but you're new. No one knows you. You'll be shouted down.
Then where do I start?
Pick your battles. What do you want to accomplish? Whatever you came here for, the key is to get on a committee of men committed to the same ends.
Now, we won't finish this entire scene because we've got too much to talk about, but essentially they go through a bunch of different committees that Yussif could be a part of. And what he ends up choosing that he wants to at least pursue is a committee talking about Babylonian prophecies. Why does he want to talk about prophecies in the Old Testament? And that is because obviously he knows Jesus. He's been studying with Jairus, for example, who has gone through the Old Testament and seen all of these prophecies about Jesus ahead of time. And so he knows that if he can maybe get in that committee, he can start swaying people towards understanding that Jesus is this Messiah that's talked about in the Old Testament. That's what he wants to do overall. But at the end of the day, that doesn't quite happen. So he does decide that he wants to pursue that committee. However, the next scene that we see him in, they try to do exactly that. Doesn't quite work out for him.
Zebediah, this is Yussif, son of Arnan.
Ah, yes.
So Zebediah is a key person who you need to keep your eye on, because he's not just important in this episode. He's going to be important later, and I think he's going to reappear in season 5 as well. So he's going to be a big player within the Sanhedrin throughout the rest of the series, basically. So we see Zebediah here. He is the one that's in charge of the committee for the prophecies in the book of Daniel, I think it is, or the Babylonian prophecies overall.
Recently appointed, I hear. Congratulations.
Thank you, Rabbi.
It was of note to see your name show up on the list out of nowhere.
Well, I wouldn't say out.
Let's cut right to it. Where did you get the money for your seat?
Zebediah!
My family owns a prominent construction business in Jerusalem.
So everybody looks down on him because of his position. His dad is a construction worker, but remember, these are the high religious elites. This is like, the highest religious people in the world looking down on a construction worker because he's just nothing, right? This is a dumb construction worker. He doesn't deserve anything, right? And if Yussif comes from that family, he doesn't deserve any respect in their eyes.
Land ownership would be one thing, but construction? How vulgar.
Yussif, that was the chair of the Prophecy Fulfillment Committee.
What's so vulgar about construction?
They think the new buildings are a blight on the city's aesthetic. Good day.
So because that didn't work out, Shmuel's trying to introduce him to some other people, and he begins to introduce him to Gedera here.
That was a marvelous speech on Pilate you gave today.
So, will you support a wedding?
Let's schedule a lunch with you and my colleague Yanni. This is Yussif, son of Arnan, and...
I know Arnan. He built my home. Which rabbi sponsored your application?
Anas, son of Seth?
A fellow Sadducee.
So this is a pretty big deal because Annas, son of Seth, has just retired from the Great Sanhedrin, and he has sponsored Yussif for his seat into the Great Sanhedrin. But the big problem here is that Annas, who is the son of Seth, is a Sadducee, and he actually just promoted a Pharisee into the Great Sanhedrin, which means that the Sadducees have less votes. Think about it like Democrats and Republicans, right? They have less votes now in the Great Sanhedrin because Annas just promoted Yussif into this position.
I won't bother asking why he sponsored a new member from the rival party. I already know the answer.
We are all sons of Israel, though we may disagree on particulars.
The next time you see your Abba's old friend Anas, tell him I want to talk about his son's booths. They've been buying up market stalls on Mount of Olives, even before they're listed as being for sale. I want to know who his contacts are.
So really what this scene is all about is the political kind of griminess that goes on in the Great Sanhedrin. And Yussif is understanding this for the first time as he's kind of going into this whole situation. And he does not like it, as we can see. He really has a hard time with that. So as we move forward, we get to a point where Yussif begins to talk to some more people within the Great Sanhedrin, and this is one of the most interesting portions here that I love about this Pharisee section right here. So let's jump in right here.
The session is adjourned.
First of all, Nicodemus is missing from all these shots, by the way. We're hoping to see Nicodemus for sure. If not in the rest of season 4, definitely in season 5. And so, it's definitely disappointing that we haven't seen him in all of these different scenes because we definitely could have. He was a member of the Sanhedrin all throughout Jesus' ministry. And so we definitely had the opportunity to see him in this place for sure. But he's been gone for different reasons, different, excuses basically throughout this whole section. You can see how disheartened Yussif is here, having a hard time accepting being here because he never really wanted to be here. So,
It's been quite a couple of days, hasn't it, Rabbi Yussif?
Learned a lot?
I've mostly learned. I have a lot to learn.
Everybody starts somewhere. I'm still not one of the 72 like you.
So this is a good clarification. Yanni is not part of the 72, which means he's not part of the Great Sanhedrin. He may be part of like a lesser Sanhedrin or somewhere else, outside of Jerusalem, but it really seems like he's just a Pharisee. We don't really get a good idea of what his role is fully. While I'm talking about Yanni actually as well, the actor who plays Yanni plays Moses in the upcoming series, the Promised Land series, which is a kind of a satire office, sort of Parks and Rec type show that's obviously based on the Exodus and Moses' journey. So he's actually the lead in that show, which is quite interesting.
I'll catch you on. Take heart. Tomorrow's session will not be as excruciating. Everyone needs to get home before Shabbat sundown.
Rabbi Lahad. Rabbi Yussif, come. I never got the chance to introduce you yesterday. This is Lahad, son of Ethnan.
So here is Rabbi Lahad. He is a pretty key part, especially for this episode and the future of what is going to happen in this whole storyline. Okay, so everybody's really mad that Lahad does not have a beard. He's the first Pharisee that we've seen, really the first older male character that does not have a beard, other than maybe Matthew at the very beginning, and of course the Romans. And so Jewish culture, basically, it was very common for every male to have a beard. However, I will say that this is not impossible. It is possible that perhaps he has some sort of disease that does not allow him to grow a beard. Growing a beard would not be a requirement from the law or a requirement in Jewish culture. It would definitely be looked down upon, and it would be very strange for this to be the case. However, it wouldn't have been something that would have disqualified him from being part of the Great Sanhedrin. So that's where I sit with that. I know a lot of people were like, this is so weird. Why wouldn't he have a beard? This is not right. But it's possible. It's just probably not very likely, for sure.
He chairs the select committee on reclamation of Beersheba and southern border reform that I told you about.
So this is the guy that is in charge of the reclamation of the territory of Israel. This is a big thing because obviously we're still dealing with the territory of Israel today, where the lines are for the different land and what is actually happening there. This whole thing goes back in history so far, even beyond the time of Christ. But this is a good example of what it was like during the time of Christ. Now, he is part of that committee that wants to gain that land back. But the whole purpose of this, let's continue on. I'll keep on explaining as we go.
It's an honor to make your acquaintance, Rabbi.
I'll decide if the honor's all mine by deciphering through my famous either-or questions.
So Lahad has famous either-or questions. And these are 3 questions that are kind of interesting. And the more I dug into these, the more I was like, wow, that's actually really smart. So let's go through these.
Yes, very famous indeed.
What are they?
Haddock or Sibrim?
So the first question that he asks is haddock or sea bream. These are 2 different types of fish. Now, at first, I was like, okay, this is like a preference thing. Maybe he's just trying to gauge the character of the person that he's asking, right? This is the first question of his famous 3 questions. So the first question, haddock or sea bream, what is the purpose of this? Well, we actually go back to the understanding of Jewish law, right? So the kishrut, which is like the food laws, basically, this is what he's trying to get at here. For fish specifically, fish have to have 2 things. They have to have fins and they have to have scales. If they don't have fins or scales, either or, then they are not kosher. Okay, so kashrut is an understanding of the food laws in Judaism, and so both of these fish that he's talking about here both have fins and scales. And so I believe that the reason why he's asking this question is to kind of trick the person that he's talking to. The person that he's talking to should have an idea of basically, are these fish kosher? If not, which one is not kosher and which one should I pick, right? And so this is a way of Lahad saying, do you know the law or don't you, right? Because you could pick either of these fish, but if you don't give me a good explanation for it, or you don't talk about it or say, well, I could have either, but I prefer the sea bream, right? I think that's the reason why he's asking this. It's a law question to see if you're intelligent in the law or not. And I don't know, at least that's what I get from this. But let's go on to the next question here.
Just go with your first instinct.
Brim.
Rope sandals or bridle leather?
So rope sandals or bridle leather. So sandals that are very, very much for poor people, or sandals that are very much for more wealthy, people that can afford leather, bridle leather sandals.
Rope.
So Yussif quickly says roped, which means that he prefers a more poor lifestyle. He's not attached to his attachments. He's not attached to his material things. Again, like we've talked about before, just like the prayer in the beginning, near the beginning of episode 2, when Yussif is putting on all of his different garb for his, Jewish practice, he's actually praying different scriptures that talk about how everything is meaningless, that we don't want to chase after money. We don't want to chase after these different things. And this is all from Ecclesiastes there. And so here he immediately says roped sandals rather than bridle leather to kind of show that he doesn't care about money.
Hillel or Shammai?
Last question is Hillel or Shammai. This one's really easy for Yussif because he is in the house of Hillel. He is in the line of Hillel, not lineage in the terms of family, but in the terms of scholarship. Because he is a student of Nicodemus, he is a student of Hillel by proxy.
Hillel.
Why?
I sat at the feet of Rabbi Nicodemus.
The teacher of teachers, feared by all. Even Shammai, even if we won't admit it.
I don't know if Nicodemus was this feared or influential during the time. We don't really know that much about Nicodemus, just that he was part of the Sanhedrin.
And respected throughout all the land. He's been away on a research trip for several weeks. Was he a special guest instructor at your Hebrew school? You seem a little young for that.
He was visiting Capernaum where I was interning.
Why did you choose Capernaum?
To be among the Galileans, the common people, away from my family house in the upper city here.
This is key as well. This is showing us a little bit more about how season 1 worked. We can see that Yussif chose to be in Capernaum for specific reasons. I'll just say that could mean that other people chose to be in Capernaum for specific reasons as well, not necessarily that they're from there or have any connections there as well. We'll come back to that at a later time.
Very noble. I'm impressed. It calls to mind the story of Samuel going to Bethlehem to anoint one of the sons of Jesse, the next king of Israel. They hadn't even thought David worth bringing in for Samuel to see. You'll be surprised what you'll find in the small, obscure places.
Indeed.
And of course, Yussif here is saying indeed, because he also knows the story of Jesus by this point and how where the Messiah is going to be born, all that kind of stuff, right? He's been going through these prophecies, I'm sure, with Jairus for the past several months, if not more than that, right? And so he's saying, yeah, you will be surprised where you'll find, the greatest of these things pointing to Jesus here.
Rabbi Shmuel tells me you're interested in redrawing the southern border of Israel to encompass the city of Beersheba.
That's right. To honor God's original promise of the land borders north to south, from Dan to Beersheba.
Might be difficult to attract much enthusiasm for such an agenda when we have so much going on with Rome, don't you think?
We have a strategy. Beersheba may not seem like an urgent matter to many in the Sanhedrin, but we know what will get their attention. The death of Jesus of Nazareth.
So again, they're seeing Jesus as this big threat. And just like Gadara said earlier, he didn't outright say, hey, let's kill Jesus in order for us to, get on Pilate's good side. But he did kind of put the idea out there overall. So this specific committee that Lahad is in charge of, he has decided, okay, I think the best thing that we could do is to get rid of this Jesus guy that's causing us so many issues. He's actually riling up different cities like Capernaum or even in the Decapolis. And there's a bunch of stuff that he's basically causing us pain through. So let's get rid of this Jesus guy. And at the same time, we can appease Pilate, make him look good, give him a win, right? And we can kind of tie all these things together. But the reason why he's doing this in the first place is not because he hates Jesus. It's not because he loves Pilate. It's because he wants his committee to stand out above the rest. And there's another connection point here that's going to be really, really important in just a second as well.
I'm sorry?
Surely you've encountered him in Capernaum.
Of course we have, but...
He's making enemies everywhere, for good reason. There is a group in Tel Dor that sent a delegation to Jerusalem.
So there is a group in Tel Dor that sent a delegation to Jerusalem. So this is talking specifically about Kaphni, about Ramah's father, okay? Ramah's father is now basically amassing a group of people that are 100% against Jesus. He is bad talking him in every way that he possibly can, telling people that he is a sorcerer, that he's evil, that we need to get rid of him. And so this is spreading. It's causing a lot of issues now. So not only is Jesus this nuisance to Rome and to the Jewish leaders, but now there's a lot of people that are talking bad about him as well and wanting to get rid of him, right? And so this was Kaphni's basically curse that he put on Jesus in the last episode. He says, I curse you. I'm going to do everything in my power to get rid of you. I'm going to do everything in my power to stop your ministry. I'm going to do everything in my power to avenge my daughter, basically. And so this is what Kaphni is doing here. And Lahad is using Kaphni, he's using Pilate, and he's using Jesus in order to get what he wants in terms of redrawing the lines of Beersheba to be within the bounds of Israel again. So that's how all these things are connected here.
To lobby for his deposition and prosecution.
I had not heard there were citizens moving to prosecute.
They claim his actions led to the death of a man's daughter. They're definitely moving to prosecute. He makes Jerusalem nervous. And someone in Pilate's confidence is said to have been at an event at the Decapolis in which he broke bread with heathens.
And so there he's talking about, in Pilate's confidence, basically he's talking about Atticus here. So Atticus has seen different things with Jesus. So word is getting around that the Romans know about Jesus, the Jewish leaders know about Jesus. There's this other group of civilians that hate him and want him gone. So everything is kind of coming together here for sure.
Rome is taking him seriously now.
If he is arrested or even punished by death due to our efforts, it will draw attention to our cause.
Forgive me. I'm a bit surprised at how casually you're speaking of the ending of a life.
Aren't capital punishments only allowed in temple grounds?
So this is a big thing too. Capital punishments are only allowed on temple grounds. Obviously, this is a big thing with Rome, but also the Jewish people, they have a certain way that they do things. It's not normal for Jews to just go around killing each other, at least not during the time of Jesus, for sure. We hear about people being stoned and things like that, but this wasn't like a norm. This was like a very rare thing that happened. And so they're kind of questioning here, but what we're seeing here is Yussif and Shmuel by the end of this episode are on the same side. We see that Shmuel is definitely fighting along the same lines as Yussif is, and Yussif is seeing that and Shmuel is seeing that. So they begin to work together a bit, which we might see more of in this season.
And when was the last time the Sanhedrin even carried one out?
He has also claimed to be the Son of Man.
Which they already know, of course, because they've been around him all this time. If they accept that he said that he was the Son of Man, this could definitely cause some issues for them because, well, they would be like complicit in what he said, especially Yussif here.
The politics of our decisions aside, this is no innocent man.
Blood on your hands does not always equate to wrongdoing. Sometimes the results can be just.
Of course, Yanni is standing where he always stood. He's against Jesus. He doesn't agree with this. He thinks he's a false prophet.
If this Nazarene continues his efforts, the nation will practically thank us.
Super hard situation there. So now we're seeing what the play is, right? This group in particular, they want Jesus gone because if they have Jesus gone, they can accomplish their own goals, which have nothing to do with Jesus, right? Now we're going to see, as we see throughout scripture, that more and more groups are going to start to pile in on this. For example, like I told you earlier, the Herodians. So this is a big group here that's going to basically have a lot of issues with Jesus. And so that's where we're going to see this. And I believe that we'll see this scene in particular in season 5, paying taxes to Caesar. And then they sent him to some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians. These are two different groups. The Herodians, like I talked about earlier, are a political group. The Pharisees are a religious group to trap him in his talk. And they came and they said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are true and do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not?" Now, again, they're trying to trap him in his words, and Jesus, of course, gets out of this. We're not going to talk about this scene here because, of course, we're going to talk about it when it comes out in season 5. I'm pretty sure they're going to do this in season 5, but it will be interesting to see if they do that. Anyway, I know this is a long video. The Pharisees are really, really interesting. There's so many intricacies that go along with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Herodians and the scribes and all these different people, Hillel and Shammai, everything else that's going on there. All of this plays into the crucifixion of Jesus. We have to understand that as we're reading through the Gospels. And so I love this episode for that specific reason, that it really gives us a huge outline as to what to expect as we're talking about all these little different things there. So really, really interesting stuff.